Live from the Hoboken Historical Museum, it's Hoboken Talks, a weekly show where we talk to some of Hoboken's most interesting people, artists, musicians, writers, business people, chefs, you name it. And today, what a treat. This week, our guest, you know who she is? It's Caren Lissner. Yeah. Maybe you've seen her byline in local publications, Hoboken Reporter, Hoboken Patch, Jersey Digs. Maybe during the pandemic, you watched the Netflix film Carrie Pilby. She wrote the book. She did. We're going to learn those things and lots more today.
Hi.
My name's Jack. It's a pleasure to be with you again. We are live on, where are we live on? We're live on YouTube. We're live on Facebook. We're live on Twitter. And if you're watching live on any of those, by any of those means, you can type in a question or a comment. And Rand Hoppy, who he was under the knife recently, but he's here because he cares.
Aww.
But he will put your comments up on screen, and we will. Caren will answer your questions
as best I can. Are we on the TikTok? Because I hear the kids are into the TikTok these days.
Not on TikTok, and don't vandalize, because I hear that. That's a message now, is to vandalize. We don't.
There's a new challenge. I can't keep up.
Yeah, no, don't vandalize.
I'm still stuck on the outlet challenge. Is there an outlet? Oh, there's an outlet right there.
It's gonna be a long hour. Welcome, Caren Lissner. Thank you for joining us
in the snow.
Here in the snow. Let's start at the beginning. You're
That's a very good place to start.
You're a Jersey girl.
Yes, I am. I am. I have a pocketbook full of stuff.
Talk about that. Well, tell us where did you grow up, and talk about maybe early interest in reading and writing. How about that? Rand, could you put the first slide up just for give us a little context?
Oh.
Now, does this home look familiar?
Yes, it does. Where did you get this? This is this is where I grew up in Freehold. Actually, we moved around a lot, but my formative years were in this house. And there was not a lot to do in Freehold, so that's why I mostly, like a lot of kids did in the 80s, our parents said go out and play. So I rode around on my bike a lot, investigating, exploring the local creek. I kept trying to catch a frog, and finally, my brother and I did catch a frog, and it took us years, and then we had no idea what to do with a frog, and we brought it back. But it was the pursuit of the frog. So that's the kind of stuff I remember. We lived in a kind of it was a nice development, but there was nothing around. And if you snuck out at night, the only thing to do was like maybe go to a historical site. So
that's an interesting house. It looks like it wants to be 2 stories, but didn't quite get there, or I don't know.
Yeah, and there was some kind of problem where the developers put the heating vent on the ceiling, and so it was always very cold because heat rises.
All right.
It doesn't go down.
And so the world of
So I had to use my imagination, and I made up a lot of stories.
Okay. Rand, how about that next photo? Now, who's this?
That's me and my phone. Everyone had that phone, didn't they?
And what are you writing, a story? Or you?
I'm probably coloring, but I did pretty soon write stories. I would fold over a piece of paper, and that was a book. So I always thought about what if this happened or that happened, and that's where I always wanted to explore that. But I guess we had a phone table, and that looks like the Monmouth County phone book.
And for our younger viewers, that's a
that's a non-cell phone.
It's a rotary
It's a rotary phone.
Yeah.
We didn't even have a push button because we were poor.
Okay.
No, because most people didn't have them yet. This is interesting.
Cammer. Checking in.
Eric Cammer. Hi, Eric Cammer.
Regular viewer. Appreciate
The
it.
phone.
Eric.
I'm glad you like the phone. So
Or he's doing his ET impression.
When I lived in Freehold, one of my best friends there, her father worked at Bell Labs, which was not very far away. And when we had our units on the future, which was like when we thought about we were going to have flying cars when we grow up and all that stuff, my friend's dad used to come in from Bell Labs and talk about the future. And he would say, you're going to read news on a little phone sitting on the subway going to work. And he used to say, someday you're going to be able to have a phone where you can see the person you're talking to. And our hands always went up. And we always had the same question. What happens if someone calls us and we're in the bath or in the shower? They're going to see us naked. So we were very logical kids.
A question that still hasn't been answered fully.
Yeah. Some people did forget not to turn the camera off.
So you're getting older. You're high school. You cross paths with a
few people.
A few people.
Which person are you thinking of? I have an interesting person. I've crossed paths with a few.
There was one notable New Jersey writer. Pulitzer Prize winning writer.
Yes, and it wasn't me. Yeah, I was the one who always I was always curious and wanted to know what was going on in the neighborhood and wanted to track down things. But the Pulitzer Prize winner in my high school ended up being Diaz, who at the time went by Not Diaz. He was in my journalism class in high school. And so we had an interesting year together in journalism class because we both wanted to be writers one day. And I was I tried too hard. I think I didn't have enough fun, and he tried too little, I think, for his talent because he was very talented. But I think like a lot of people, he didn't realize kind of till the end of high school that he could have done more with it. There were a lot of really smart kids in my high school that didn't. For some reason, they didn't try as hard as they could have. And he was very funny. He used to come in and imitate Howard Stern a lot. And I think he was just bored in our journalism class, and he would force the conversation off course. So we didn't learn a lot about journalism, but I had a lot of interesting Not Diaz experiences in my class.
And then you went on to the University of Pennsylvania, Penn, as it's sometimes called. Yep. And UPenn.
Yes.
And there you began. Was it journalism? What did you?
Well, there wasn't a journalism major, and I think most of the people I've worked with in journalism never studied journalism. But there was a great daily paper, and still is, although it's not daily anymore. It's the Daily Pennsylvanian, and there were some very dedicated people there. And at a school like Penn, unfortunately, practical things took a backseat to sort of lofty classes like the philosophy of penguins and things like that. So there wasn't a journalism class, but the Daily Pennsylvanian, yes, thank you, Terry Francis.
Hey, Terry. Terry Francis says, "Go Quakers."
Thank you. So, so I worked on
Terry Francis, former guest on the Hoboken Talks.
And I hope he comes back and prances some more.
Hey.
So, through the snow. So, So anyway, so I was on the DP. There were some people at the DP who would stay there until 2 a.m. I did not, but I got a really good journalism education and learned on the job and learned from some great people. Some of them went into journalism. One of them, Matt Selman, became an executive producer on The Simpsons. So you never know where people are going to take their sense of humor, I guess.
A familiar name for us credit watchers, readers.
Yes.
All right, then what brings you to Hoboken?
Well, I heard I graduated sometime in the 90s, and I always, growing up, I always heard New York City was where you went to be a writer. And New York City was also a scary place growing up because here in New Jersey, we didn't really have our own news. We would watch New York City news and learn more about New York City than our state, and we would hear about muggings, which I don't even think anyone uses the term anymore. And it was pretty brutal. There was a pretty high crime rate. But I wanted to go to New York, so I was a little intimidated, but I I sort of grew up thinking that was a place to go. And then somebody said to me after I graduated, well, actually, I had friends who graduated the year before, and she had a 2-bedroom apartment in Weehawken. And she said, there's a view of the Empire State Building from my bathtub, and it's $330 a month for the room if you want to stay here this summer. So I went after college. I moved in with this friend who had a 2-bedroom in Weehawken, and I paid $330 a month, and I could step into the bath and look at the Empire State Building and dream big dreams.
Now, if someone called you, though, would they see you naked, or would they be looking at the
Empire State Building? That is a good question, but that was before cell phones.
All right.
So I started hearing about Hoboken, that it was a good place for young people, and as we know, it's better than New York City, but we don't want all those people coming here. But I heard.
Hey, I also host Manhattan Talks for a different museum. So
the commute must be terrible to that. So my first experience in Hoboken was actually I was looking for a doctor, and as the young people should always know what health insurance was like back then. It was awfully horrible. So I had to go to whatever doctor was on my insurance, and I was new to the area, but I did find a pretty good doctor in Hoboken. So I drove in one day, and it happened to be the day of the 1993 election, and there was this huge group of people on one side, and there was a giant lit up sign that said big election today, and there was a huge group of people on the other side of Washington Street, and they were yelling at each other, and I said, this must be the place for me.
All right.
I didn't know what I was getting into, but I and actually I was told there were no apartments available, which shocked me. And back then there was a construction slowdown, and so I went up and down the streets putting up posters looking for an apartment. And this couple, and actually I'm going to have a little essay about this in a New Jersey anthology that's coming out next year. But there was this couple leaving their walk-up apartment, and it was a 2-bedroom. And so I moved in. I had just enough money. I was nearly broke, but I had just enough money for a month's rent, and I got a roommate through the Hoboken Reporter Classifieds, just some random girl who was graduating from college, and that was my start in Hoboken.
And as you're reading those Hoboken Reporter Classifieds, you flip to Help Wanted, and it says copy girl needed, or what?
Yeah.
How did that connection?
There was an ad for reporter, and I figured I'd freelance. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to get into. I thought maybe I'd work in publishing.
Oh, look, that's
our beautiful paper. And I like to actually this photo that's my backdrop is I take a lot of photos that are on my Instagram if anyone likes looking at photos of Hoboken and surrounding, and I make a few of them into postcards, so that the one behind us is one of my postcards. But this photo of the guy.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, okay. But the guy carrying the tree up the 100 steps is another one of my photos. But I liked being able to put my creativity in the paper and into the paper, and so I was eventually. I had actually gotten a little bit into politics, and I was an intern in the State House a little bit before coming to Hoboken, and I was working and then in New York I worked for some weird Democratic political consultants, but the whole company they were trying to start fell apart. So my first love was writing and journalism anyway, both fiction and nonfiction. So I saw this ad, and I figured maybe I'll write some freelance stuff, and I pitched a bunch of stories that were kind of naive, like what's it like to look for an apartment, and how do you kill roaches, and important things like that. Thank you, Melissa. She's a very nice person.
See, these things don't actually pop up on the viewer, so we have to read them. But this is Melissa Abernathy, who works here at the museum, and she says, "I love your Instagram. You have a great eye."
Thank you.
You should see Rand Hoppy's eye, though.
Is that where he went?
That is a great eye.
Oh, well, thank you, Melissa. Oh, look, we have Bruce Springsteen calling in. See, if they can't see it, we can just make stuff up, right? Hi, Bruce. I want our ratings to go up. I'm hoping if you get a good Nielsen rating, they'll move this show to a prime time.
Bruce Springsteen's birthday today.
Is it?
72 years old.
72.
Yes.
That's
you land a job at the Hoboken Reporter.
Yes.
As the
Hoboken beat reporter. So that was me, and I only had one town, and I was thinking, I was thinking, what career do I do? I was applying for so many publishing jobs in New York, and every time I go in, there would be a stack of resumes from every English major, from every college in the country. And I saw this like peach one, and it was beautiful, and it had on top Radcliffe Publishing Course, and it was some girl named Becky. And, you know, I said, do I keep torturing myself on these interviews, or do I become the local
Council
friendly
person Tiffany Fisher says, so excited.
Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, Karen.
Hi. So I said, do I keep torturing myself going to these job interviews across the river and competing with Becky from the Radcliffe Publishing Course, or do I become the local reporter and stop always making my life difficult? Because this is really what I want to do. It was $300 a week, but.
And just give us a quick picture of the Hudson reporter system at that time. We're talking about the late 90s.
Yeah, and I'll try to make it very brief because I think people are bored by journalism. They want to comment on it, but it's hard to tell people, no, that's not what happens, because nobody really cares that this, but it's kind of interesting.
But was it a big staff? Was it a?
It was medium. We were in the basement of a building, and we had the first floor. It was on the corner of 14th Street. And there was a classified staff that would come in at night, 5 people. That ended up when Craigslist happened. There was no more classified ads. But so when I started, there was a classified staff. There was a graphics staff that would do pay stuff on one floor every Thursday and Friday, because we were a weekly. And we'd sit and watch them. Writers would, we'd type our stuff into computers. Finally, I got there luckily just when we had computers and I didn't have to type on a typewriter. Right. But yeah, the stuff would get laid out and it would get pasted, and the paste would be rolled on, and then we'd say, oh no, I didn't mean, that's the wrong version of my story, and the poor graphics people would have to relay the whole thing out. But it gave me a lot of pride to find a way. Thank you, Eric. It gave me a lot of pride.
Again, I'll jump in.
The audience cannot see Bruce Springsteen and Eric Kammer's comments, so we'll have to interpret.
That our man Eric Kammer says, what a great paper, the Hoboken Reporter.
He's a very candid Kammer. Sorry.
We can cut this short. Wait.
It's Kammer time.
Rand, roll the cartoons. And about how many people would you say? Are you all right? Can I get you something?
Not worry.
I may know the Hamilton.
I just. Sorry, too much water too soon.
And then
talk amongst yourselves. A chickpea is neither a chick nor. See,
now this this photo is from later in your tenure. This is not from the early days. And just the fact that even though you took the cover photo, that would have been, I guess, fairly unheard of in the early days, because there were photographers. And
yeah, when I started, we had actually a dark room, and it was really cool. We would have a guy come in and he'd take black and white photos, and he'd let them sit in the developer, and they'd come out, and it was pretty neat.
And within not that long of a time, you become the editor. How did that go down?
I don't know. I kept my nose clean and my nose to the ground and clean, and I was there at the right time, I guess. I like editing, so I was just lucky the position opened up, and I'd been there reporting, and I think possibly being able to meet deadlines was always a good thing. So I was responsible. I was in my late 20s by then. Yeah. Almost a true adult.
And did you feel like, I'm ready for this, or was it kind
of? Yeah, I did. I actually used to not tell friends because I thought it made me sound old to say I was an editor. So I used to meet people and still say I was a reporter because it just sounded old to say I was a newspaper editor at 29 or whatever.
And this was 1990?
It was the late 90s. Yeah, it was just before the turn of the millennium.
All right. And then you're not that long in the job where Rand, next slide, please.
Yeah.
We just very recently, it was the word anniversary seems does not to fit, but you know, 20 years since September 11th, 2001. must have, brought, for those of us of a certain age and up, brings back a lot of rough memories. But as a journalist who covered it in the area, could you speak to that?
Yeah, well, it was, as everyone will tell you, it was a sin you remember too. Were you in New York City that morning? Were you planning to go into New York City?
I was ready to go.
You were ready to go, like a lot of people, yeah. So it was before 9 a.m. when it all started. I happened to be at work early that day, and my boss, who was Dave Unger, who's the advertising manager, but he was a part owner, and he called me and he said, somebody said the World Trade Center's on fire. We had a warehouse somewhere full of papers, and he went to the roof and he said, oh, you should go out there. And I did. And then, there were more people gathering on the waterfront who were about to go to work, and nobody really knew what was happening. And with the benefit of hindsight, just like we're going to have a lot of hindsight today about what's happening now, really none of us knew what was happening at the time, how many more planes were coming, really what was going on, if it was on purpose. I mean, it seemed the first time we didn't know what was going on. I started walking down the waterfront. We had just gotten these huge digital cameras. They were $800, and they Olympus made them, and they were like this big. And I would take them to press conferences, and people would say, "Ooh, is that a digital?" So that's how new they were. So I went down the waterfront with my digital camera and my personal camera and started taking pictures, and then, it was a terrible thing when everything happened. There were just huge plumes of smoke. I didn't know if people were breathing over there with that smoke. And it was just like a feeling like nothing would be the same. Like I didn't know if I'd ever go into New York City again, because it just seemed like a scary place. And I didn't know what was happening to people over there. I went over to what was St. Mary Hospital, and there was a sign-up sheet to donate blood in case it was needed. So that's what I did, and I really wanted to have a drink, and I'm not much of a drinker, but that would be a day to do it. But I thought, if I drink, is that in my blood, and can I donate blood? There were all kinds of weird things I was thinking, and it was a sad and scary time, and people didn't know who was in the towers. And it was also a situation which I see again happening, where there was so much news. There are things that today probably haven't been covered that should have been covered, because usually you can kind of keep up with the main news. There are things that happened on that day that we still haven't really put into the proper perspective. Like the people who passed away, they were on certain floors. Most of the other people were able to escape because they were evacuated. So it's really, I think the first tower the plane hit, it was mostly the people on the upper floors who didn't get out. And so it was a time when no one really knew what was going to happen. And it was when the internet was not very far along. And it was, I don't know what else, it was just like it was a rough time.
Sure. Of course. And you already kind of hinted at it by saying you were, had the digital camera.
Right.
But where in your mind is, you, at some point you switch from I'm reacting to this as a human being, and right. Then I need to, this needs to be in the newspaper that I. Yeah,
and at first I didn't know it was going to be a tragedy. So, but I did. We had to come up with a plan to do it, and I ended up figuring out that all the reporters we had, we would do a special issue and not try to put out the separate papers, because we had a paper for each town. But I knew how to document it, but I didn't. I don't want to turn someone's tragedy into it's not like, people say things like journalists want to sell papers or whatever, but usually that kind of stuff doesn't really, it doesn't sell papers. But sometimes the same people who get angry at reporters later want to remember something. And that actually happened. New Jersey Transit, I think a few weeks after the incident, called us to look at our photos. They needed to document what they'd done or something like that. So there are human reasons to make sure you're documenting and covering things. But ultimately, those kind of stories are not the kind of stories I like to cover. They're just sad and not easy to cover, but it is important And now we look at things like that and like that headline and remember these are people who didn't even get the chance. I mean, it was a lot of young people working in those buildings. So those kinds of things, I think, are easy to forget. Like the fact that a lot of the people that passed away were they were new parents or they were just gotten married. Some of them, it was their first job out of college.
Well, we switch gears here.
Yes.
But
I stopped making puns. So, okay.
Now, all this time that you're working as a reporter and adjusting to being an editor, all along you're working on. And let me put a pin in that for a second because we have a nice comment from Nancy Colacerdo. She says, thanks for mentioning the human reasons we chronicle things as journalists.
Yes.
And
we could talk about the media.
Oh, we could
later.
talk about that a whole lot, but
yes, but not now.
You know,
this is more fun.
I just need to say that, you know, in recent years, as the media, you know, has been, you know, demonized.
Yeah,
I get so furious because every journalist I've ever known, they're not doing it for money or
clearly.
attention or anything. It's to share the truth and
yes.
to accuse, you know, of deceit
right.
and stuff. It just, ooh.
Well, I will. I want to comment on that
But
later.
you're, you know, you creative writing and fiction, essay, you were working on it all along. At some point, you start work on a novel. Yes,
I did, and I had been writing them since I was little. Sometimes I did a lot of young adult books because I wasn't very old, and you write what you know. And a lot of people think that kind of writing is easy, but it's not, because the older you get, the harder it is to get into that intimate kind of observational mind of a teenager. I'd love to be able to write like Judy Blume, and I can't. I don't know how she's always been able to do it. When I was a kid, I read all her books, and she had this one passage in, I think, Tales of Fourth Grade Nothing, where Peter Hatcher looks in the mirror and he says, "I can see my tonsils when I yawn." And I thought, why? Like, I would never think to put that in a book. So I was writing these young adult books because that's the kind I like straightforward writing, but it's actually not as easy as I think people think. I could never quite get the tone right. So I wrote like 4 of them and I sent them out, and I think I sent you a rejection slip. I showed you one of my early rejection slips. But each time I wrote a novel, I was starting to get more positive feedback from agents, and they'd say, "Send me your next thing. I like a lot of this. It's a little slow. It's a little quiet. You know, no car accidents in this or whatever. But I like the way you write, so send me your next thing." So I had some success with humor. I'd published some goofy essays in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I've had some serious things in both of those publications too that I pitched. But I had some funny essays, and those seemed to go over well. And I thought maybe I should try to write something that's just focused on humor. So I guess when I was about 30 and I was frustrated, I went and got a video from Take One Video on Washington Street, which used to be the kind of indie video store. In the 90s, everyone was seeing the same independent films. There was kind of a explosion of independent films, or maybe it was, there was Clerks, which I loved. And then there were a lot of, I guess, Linklater and a lot of other indie films that were popular, and the Take One was a good place to go get them. So I was renting a lot of indie films then, and the person said, "Do you want a bag?" And I thought, of course, I don't want somebody seeing what I rent. That's personal. So I just turned it into this rant, because I used to get asked for, I used to get automatically given a bag for the silliest things in grocery stores, like gum. And I thought, why don't they automatically give me a bag in the grocery store when I'm hiding my video? So I wrote this goofy rant when I got home, and I kept at it. And I thought, maybe this is going to be a book about a very nerdy young woman who graduates from college and can't really figure out her place, because that's the place I was in. And then I exaggerated it a little bit. and I brought some of myself into it, but also some of the quandaries I was dealing with, like a lot of people, especially in times before the internet, a lot of us grew up a little bit sheltered and we were very stuck in our beliefs, and it took meeting a lot of different types of people to say, hey, the world isn't really like that. So I wrote this character who had been kind of privileged and sheltered and was suddenly, she graduated early and she's in New York City, and she thinks, wait a minute, I had all this structure. I knew what to do to be accepted when I was in school. I do my work, I'd impress professors, and now I'm in the real world and I don't really know how to talk to people. And I wrote this funny thing, and I was so tired of finishing books and getting rejected. So I decided I'd send the first 50 pages out and pretend the whole thing was done and see how that went.
Okay.
I got busted for that because an agent called and he said, how much do you have done of it? And I said, blah, 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 blah. Oh, how are the Mets doing? What do you think? Do you want to represent me? So I said 100 pages are done. And he said, well, there's not a lot I can do with that, but why don't you send me the other 50? So then I had to try to rush and get the other 50 done. And then this person wanted to see it, and eventually he passed it to somebody who became my agent. He was actually working. A lot of people are assistants who read these books, the unsolicited manuscripts. So he was working with a new agent who was just wanted to represent some new writers, and she took me on, and suddenly my timing was good because chick lit was getting popular. And around the year 2000, there was Bridget Jones, there was Sex and the City. Suddenly the fate of the unmarried, childless 30-year-old woman was everyone's big concern. Our parents met at a dance, or they met in college, and now we had these great choices and didn't have to get married at 22 out of school or whatever. But now that we have these choices, how do we make the right ones, and what do we do about it? And that's what
the traveling pants, was that part of that?
The Sisterhood of the, well, I was a little younger. The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. I don't know why you didn't read all the chick lit books, but there were some lad lit books. There were some lads.
And so it was published. It was published.
Yeah, there were these new imprints that just wanted to publish chick lit, and that was one of the books.
The New York Times called it hilarious.
Yeah, there was a writer who really liked it, and he did call it hilarious. So that's not a lie. It's not fake.
2003.
Yep. And this it came out again as a teen book, but in 2003 it came out as kind of an adult book, kind of a chick book, beach read. But it came out the summer when chick lit was huge, and they eventually, I think, 80,000 copies were published.
Nice.
At first it was a run of 5,000. That was a lot and it was actually Random House was interested in it too, and they ended up taking it to a few different meetings in passing. But if it had been at Random House, they may not have given it attention. Instead it went through this new imprint that was doing just chick lit, and they published a lot more. So sometimes you get lucky, I guess.
Oh, it's a question that just occurs to me because you mentioned Diaz and that he was not Diaz before.
Yeah, at the time. Because no one.
Did you ever spell Caren with a K?
No.
No, never.
No, I'm named after someone.
Okay.
I was always with a C.
Interesting. Ram, let's get that next image.
Yes.
See, I snuck this one in here. It's was my signed copy of Carrie Pilby. Jack, it's great to finally meet you. I hope you enjoy this, and I can't wait to read your writing.
Yes, I hope there will be more of it soon.
Karen, so that was
interview yourself.
That was, you had a book reading. That was the Barnes and Noble on 6th Avenue in Manhattan.
Yep, there was. A lot of those Barnes and Nobles are gone, but they were a good place to showcase your book and meet famous Hobokenites like you who were in the area. So I was happy.
That's when I met you.
Yes.
It's a while ago.
I know. Everything's a while ago these days.
What's the next image? Can we do? Well, let's jump forward as we have plenty of time, but
don't give up, people. We'll talk about how the book became a movie later.
We're gonna get to that.
That's more, and people like the silver screen.
I know, we're going chronologically.
Yes, this is. Oh, okay. You know what? Can I turn off that alarm? I know that's. Are you not hearing it? If it doesn't bother you, that's totally fine. No, it's under the thing.
Oh, it's yours.
It's in my pocketbook. It's in my pocketbook. Yeah, it's my phone. It's in my pocketbook.
Ladies
It's not
and
the right
gentlemen.
one, but thank you. No, there's another bag.
It's not that one.
Yeah. That's where I keep my water.
There has been a little
See what happens
alarm
when you
going
go
off.
into
I don't know if you can
technology and you use
can
stuff.
hear it on the
Please
YouTube.
turn off. Please turn off your cell phones.
Can't take her anywhere. So now we're at.
Hi, Mike.
Look, there's Mike Corman says hello to you.
Yeah, he was one of the first people I met in Hoboken because I volunteered on a campaign, and he told me about Hoboken history. It was nice. Anyway,
Very nice. If only there were
there was a
structure.
place you could go to learn more about Hoboken history. Where would that place be? And would you want to donate to keep
Now
it?
in
Call 555.
in the fall of 2011, we were hit with Hurricane Irene.
Yes,
Which,
good memory.
For me, that was the first, even though for, I think as long as I'd been in Hoboken, I'd read articles about, the city is kind of under the,
Well, we had a reporter named Tom at the paper, and a few years before Hurricane Sandy, he was from Florida. And just a quick little aside, we used to hire people at the Reporter, and it was great because there were people that always wanted to get into journalism and they didn't really know how to do it, and they'd come from other careers and get trained, and some of them became great reporters. They just had it. So there was this guy, Tom, who had worked in restaurants. And he was a young guy from Florida, and he came in for an interview and he got hired, and he did this story in the late 90s about how Hoboken had the potential to be under a lot of water if the big one hit, because he was thinking about that because he was from Florida and he had hurricanes on the brain. But he wrote this story, and a lot of people say the media tries to scare you and whatever, but we're lucky enough to live in a country where you can put facts out there and you have the freedom to say, they're warning us, this could happen. I'll just understand the context. And they're saying it's a 1 in 100 chance. And there are people who can say, oh, they're trying to scare us. I'd rather live in a country where they don't allow people to give facts. So you have the freedom to be scared, or you have the freedom to actually read and see, oh, they're telling us this is a 1 in 100 chance. So I think storms are a good example of that. So we ran this story, and it's happening a lot more now. I don't think the big one has hit, but we did have Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah, for myself, I would argue that for Irene, I took extra precautions, and I was actually, but then it was kind of it was slightly underwhelming.
That's what I mean. You grew up in New Jersey. We had a lot of underwhelming hurricanes, and we would be warned about them, but sometimes they weren't underwhelming.
So then
you had the freedom to prepare.
The next year when Sandy came, I didn't take quite so many precautions as give us some recollections.
Yeah, well, we did have Hurricane Irene, and in New Jersey, we get these hurricane hype, and there is weather hype, and more of it now, because one thing people use the term the media, but it's really not a very good way to talk about the news, because there's a lot of different media, and now there's like the Weather Channel and all these things, but so it seems like hype, but some of it is important. So we had Hurricane Irene, which I might have even been I think that was a tropical storm by the time it came up. But we always have these hurricanes. A lot of them come up the Atlantic. They smack into the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and by the time they get to us, they're weekend storms, and it's a lot of rain, and so we get a little bit complacent, and things can happen all the time last minute. This storm we're having yesterday, 2 inches of rain was predicted. It was a lot. And then in the last few hours, they changed the prediction to a 1/2 inch of rain, because if you look on the radar, it's hitting New York State, and it went north of us. So yay, but that doesn't mean that we don't think, gee, we've got to be careful. We could have another flash flood situation. So we had, I guess, Tropical Storm Irene, and that could have led you to think, I'm going to learn how to take precautions, and then when this came, maybe it helped you. But in your case, it sounds like you said that was hype, nothing's going to happen. And a lot of people feel that way. It wasn't, and that's something we wrestle with in the media, or at least I do. How do you warn people and give them context? And I'm a big fan of context, and people don't get that when they only watch TV sound bites. You have to kind of read sometimes. So you have to warn people, but say there's a 1 in 50 chance of this happening. Here's how you can prepare. We're not saying it's definitely going to happen. We're not scaring you. So anyway, so Hurricane Sandy was something that I think people weren't used to. People see a lot more flooding in Hoboken, and I think we don't know if you and I have both lived here since the 90s, and I don't remember anything like Hurricane Sandy happening where there were people trapped in their buildings because the National Guard had to come in. And we didn't have power in town for over a week. Luckily, nobody passed away in the storm in Hoboken. I think there were about 50 fatalities in New Jersey. But
when did your office regain power?
It took a week, but that was kind of interesting. All the power was out. These texts would squeeze through every once in a while, and I got a text from my boss, Dave, saying we're all going to try to meet in 2 days in the morning. And so he didn't even know if I got the text, but a lot of us did come to the newspaper office at the right time. And my bosses said we have to try to put a paper out. And so we were able to do it in the maternity ward of Palisade Hospital because I guess they had a lot of backup generators because people had to have babies.
Gotta have babies.
Yes, and probably 9 months later, a lot of people had babies named Sandy. But a lot more people probably just had babies in general. Sandy, Andy, Randy, Nancy, I don't know. So we put the paper out in the maternity ward of a hospital. We had our computers set up, and we distributed it, and there was still no power in Hoboken. People were able to come down in their dark buildings and get this paper. And granted, it was always a little frustrating before the internet to work for a weekly because the news could be old and we had to figure out how to write things so that it wasn't old. But there were still things people wanted to know, or maybe they just wanted to feel a little normal to come down and say, oh, look, there's our local paper. And we got a letter or two saying that people were happy to be able to get that, to be able to get the paper and feel a little bit normal. With no power for a week. So that was good because it takes a lot for anyone to write a letter about anything.
Sure.
I just wrote a thank you letter for something a police officer did like 4 months ago, and that's actually ahead of schedule for me. But if I didn't, I'd like to get a week off to write thank you letters to people. But I always thought if we got a letter saying something actually nice about what we did, maybe that means a lot of other people are thinking it. So it was kind of nice to hear that. But we did want to get information out. You might remember at Starbucks and at City Hall, they actually had a big sign with all the things like go to the street to get water and, so.
Sure, the whiteboard was the only way to communicate.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that was where the CERT team kind of took off a little bit from that, right?
Yes. Well, I joined as a result of that volunteering, sure. But this isn't about me.
But enough about
we're here with Caren Lissner.
I want to see you interview yourself.
I almost had to tonight.
Today? Oh,
yeah.
Are you saying I was late? Fashionably.
At some point, Rand, let's go full screen. Just let's go. Come on, that's no to us. There we go. Thank you, Rand. Rand Hoppy, ladies and gentlemen, our technical wizard and head of the collection here at the Hoboken Historical Museum.
And a great collection it is. If you'd like to donate, you can call 221-555. Isn't this like, don't we have to have sponsors?
At what point was there discussion of turning the book Carrie Pilby into a motion picture?
Well, it's something a lot of almost every writer dreams of it because it's a way to connect with more people. I write stories because I want to reach people. I want to hear what they think. I want to communicate. I want to see if there are other people who are seeing the same things I am, having the same questions, seeing the same beauty. Sometimes I just want to share something in a certain way. So having characters played out on a movie screen is a great thing. So when the book came out already, there was a production company that was interested, and a production company is different from a studio. There are not many studios right now. There are like 6, I think, in Hollywood, and they're the ones that have all the dough and they can actually make the movies. Their production companies have usually small budgets, and they partner with other production companies and studios to get movies made, or at least that's one way to do it. So a production company reached out, the option, the book for a year. That was like after it came out in 2003. They didn't. Companies can option a movie for a year. They pay you for the rights, and then they can do what they want with it. And there's a long contract to sign that spells out everything. Like, do I get a ticket to the premiere if it premieres and stuff like that? So I got a few $1,000s, and somebody left the company probably, and they decided not to go forward. That's what happens. I mean, there's so many things that make a movie not happen. It's amazing. Any movies get made because people have different tastes, and if you're putting millions of dollars into something, you've got to have a whole bunch of people on the same page. So anyway, so this one great company tried to do something with it, and I don't know all of the things that happened, but ultimately they didn't renew the option. And a few years later, Disney was interested in doing a TV show. And they optioned the book for a year, and I got some more money for nothing, checks for free. And nothing happened. And then it seemed like maybe nothing would happen. And that's what usually happens. I think more than 98% of film options do not become a movie. I've read that statistic a few times. But somebody has to be the 2%, especially if you hold your breath long enough. So then these two women, so there was a woman actually when the book came out, a woman named Suzanne Farwell, who's a producer. She was working, I think, for Sony, and she got the book and read it and kind of liked it, but she wasn't in a position to do a lot with it. So 10 years or 15 years later, she remembered it. She had worked with a woman named Susan Johnson, who was a director and was ready to direct her first feature film. And they were these two women who wanted to make a movie, and they thought this would be the right book to make a movie. And they kind of handcrafted this movie. They raised money on Kickstarter. They hired a screenwriter named Cara Holden. She read the book. She wrote a script. I got to see it. I didn't get any kind of official approval, rights to have approval or anything, because nobody wants their movie scuttled by an author who's like, no, I don't want that. I don't want that.
Was there ever a moment where you were like, ooh, why can't I write the movie? It's my book.
I said I'd be willing to do it, but often that doesn't happen. It's probably better. It's hard to separate yourself from your work. I don't know if I would have had the perspective or been able to step back. Sometimes you need to be able to let things go. And that's in a movie. You can't, it was a 400-page book, and you can't have that in a movie.
Right.
A movie is 90 minutes or 90 pages. A lot of that is dialogue. So I might have said, but that's a beautiful little description of New York in the snow. I don't want to take that out or whatever. So Cara wrote the script, and it was very good. And there were something, I gave suggestions. One of the things in it, they said she could read 37 books in a week. And I said, that's just impossible. I know she's a genius. And that was something that stayed for like 3 versions of the movie. And finally, I think I convinced them to take that out. But it was a really good script, and there was some new stuff. There was some funny stuff. It brought the characters to life, and it was rich. And everything about the movie turned out to be rich. Since it was an indie film, I guess I got to.
And let's look at now
some
that
stills. I have some never before
so this
seen
is
photos.
Actor Gabriel Byrne.
Yes, he played the father, and he was very good. And he was freezing. We filmed in Central Park, and I actually got to have a cameo in the movie because Susan Johnson was very nice to put me in a little scene reading a book.
Now, did they want you on set? Or we were just welcome on set, or were you kind of tolerated on set?
And I was working at the Reporter at the time, so I actually had to leave, and I was sneaking out a lot. I guess I should have been honest, but I don't know. One time I left work early and just snuck to the movie set, and Dave, my boss, texted me and said, and it was the day I was going to meet Nathan Lane, and Dave said, "Are you working today?" And I was joking, and my agent happened to be there. And I said, well, I'm going to text that I'm working, but I'm working with Nathan Lane, which is really snobby and mean. But I thought that was like one of those forbidden thoughts you have. But, you know, I still got my work done at the paper that day. But no,
Is
they
Dave
were
watching? Hello,
probably.
Dave. Hello,
he's,
Dave.
He's fine with it. But no, so they did invite me on the set all the time, and I didn't want to be the person sitting there. Don't do that. By that time, I'd read so many versions of the script. I was just really happy, and I didn't. It was this feeling like when you're at a high school play and everyone's backstage and giddy. These were actors. They knew what they were doing. They improvised a little bit. They were happy to be there, and everyone was happy.
And this is 2015?
This yeah, it took a long time. It was 2015 or 16 when it was filmed. So I got to be, so Susan put me in this scene where I'm sitting on a bench, and I brought my friend, my late great friend, Ned Vizzini was a writer. And so I brought his book, Be More Chill. And I brought a couple copies of Carrie Pilby and sat on the bench and read them in my scene. And Carrie walks past me. So it was July 5th, I think, 2016. Not July 5th, sorry, January 5th. And it was Central Park. And that's where we are filming, and it was freezing. And so Gabriel Byrne is freezing there before he has this climactic scene where he apologizes to Carrie for not being a very good father who's there.
Spoiler alert.
Sorry. Well, anyway, so that's Central Park. The lake is frozen. I don't know where the ducks went.
All right. Next image, please. Oh, there's kind of a glamour pic from that era, from what? It was a big party or a premiere or a screening?
No, just my friend Rob came and took my photo because he's an Associated Press photographer.
Nice pic. All right.
Yes, my friend Rob from Freehold took that.
Freehold Rob.
Freehold Rob.
Look, there's you and Broadway superstar Nathan Lane.
Yes, he plays a shrink in the movie. He was hilarious, and he was very nice to me. And the director of the movie told all the actors not to read the book because she said it would, you know, she didn't want them to have an idea in their mind. She wanted them to read the script and act the way they were in the script. But he went and read it and disobeyed and had it all marked up when I met him. And I thought that was really sweet. And somebody said to me, somebody from Broadway is going to want to know the character inside and out. So he's going to read the book. So he said, I thought it was a beautiful book and I think it's going to be a beautiful movie. And I said, thank you, Nathan Lane. And then I ran out of there so I wouldn't say something stupid. And he had to get back to work. But he was very nice.
All right. Next image. Look at this. That's Jason Ritter, the son of the late John Ritter.
Yes, and I talked to him about that. I met him. The film premiered at the Toronto Film Festival, and that's one way independent films get seen and get some investors. So I met him at a party after the premiere, and I told him how I convinced my parents to let me stay up to watch Three's Company because all my friends watched it and I wasn't allowed to stay up that late. And so I told him about this and I said, I was so grateful to your father because he had this show and I got to have a later bedtime. And he laughed and was probably thinking, get away from me. No, he said, I've never heard that one before. He was very nice.
See, sometimes on that show, they'd be having an innocent conversation, but then like Mr. Furley would start listening at the door and he would hear something, you know, out of context.
Mr.
And
Furley.
You know,
well, I don't know why all my classmates watched that because it was all like about this sexual innuendo. There was this one episode where Jack was dating a therapist and his roommates found the card and they were like, look, it says the rapist on the card. And he was like, that's therapist. So like, why were little kids watching this show?
Our own,
yes, Nathan Lane is, he went.
Melissa Abernathy asks, isn't Lane from Hudson County?
Yes, he's from Jersey City and he went to St. Peter's Prep.
Has he ever been profiled in the Jersey City Reporter?
I'm sure he was. I don't know if we ever interviewed him.
And what's Jason Ritter? He's doing a little light reading there. What's?
Yeah, I asked him to sign my book.
Nice, very nice.
That was very nice. Yes.
Now, but meanwhile, during this film, the world is still going on. You're still the editor of the Hoboken Reporter, the Hudson Reporter. How many editions were there at one time? Weehawken.
Yeah, at its height, we had a reporter whose job was just to cover Weehawken. Weehawken doesn't even have a full-time mayor, but we had a full-time reporter, and her name was Beth, and she found 4 to 5 things a week to write in Weehawken. That was kind of a heyday. We could keep a paper going in a very quiet town.
But this was a huge thing. The Women's March.
The Women's March, yeah. And it was the Women's March happened to be the same week that Mary Tyler Moore passed away. So I wrote the headline, "You're going to make it after all," and it was during the inauguration, and it was kind of a hopefully the girls out there got the message.
And
yeah, I had in my job as editor, I had to like blurt out a word over there. It's kind of like another way to call a cat a kitten. It's 5 letters. Yeah, I don't know. It's OPP.
You know me. Look at this. This is 2017 big premiere.
Yeah, that was where was that? That was New York. Yeah, that was our New York.
New York City. That's exciting.
It was, and it was nice.
Red carpet. Great. It was a red
carpet.
Yeah,
I actually had to be on the red carpet. Little shy, goofy me. So yeah. So that was another premiere, and we had a screening, and it was nice. It was nice to be able to invite. There were a lot of people that invested in the movie and supported it. It was nice to be able to have them there.
And then a lot of people have seen it on Netflix.
Still on Netflix. You can still watch it tonight.
Now, is that you? We don't. No.
That's not. It was a little weird. They had her dressing kind of like me. I was a little worried about that. But yeah, it turned out to be a great. I mean, Susan Johnson really, with her direction, she captured the best of New York, and she's a West Coast person, so I think she was able to capture kind of because when I got to New York, it was kind of magical, and I've been in this area a long time. Sometimes I forget to look at it that way. And there's, like she said to me at one point, every street there's something amazing, and so I think she captured that in the film. So so there's so many luscious things about this movie, but it's very funny. There's some romantic moments, as you can see, and it takes place in New York City. It's a good holiday film.
And you get like a nickel every time somebody watches it, or how does that work?
Not really. A nickel is about what I've always earned for everything. I get a little money when the book sells. I don't get a nickel, but you never know. Every time somebody new sees it, buy the book.
Watch the movie and then buy the book. And compare and contrast.
And I will speak at book clubs and things like that, because things lead to other things. And the movie got made because somebody was sitting in her office and was like, oh, 20 years from now, this might make a good movie.
All right, let's turn the page.
Turn the page. I'm going to turn off my phone as you turn the page.
Now, here's an article from 2018 featuring our own Mayor Ravi Bala.
Yep.
The truth about fake news. This was a story that, well, tell us this story.
Yeah, this might have been one of the most important stories we wrote, I think, because I feel like people don't know how dangerous it is these days that media is being delegitimized. And first of all, media means 5,000 different things, and any sentence with the critical sentence with the words "the media" is probably not really taking into account what's actually going on, and it's kind of lazy. Like if people say the media is out for ratings, that's a cell phone. That means they only watch TV, and you shouldn't get your news from sound bites. You and I grew up in an era where probably our parents got 2 or 3 newspapers. You couldn't just read a slogan and say, oh yeah, the schools are doing this and the teachers are this and the lawyers are this. You had to understand your news, and that's what people need to do, not pass along these slogans. So when do we get cut off at a certain point, or can we go over?
Well, this specific story. Let's get
this is important. So this is one of the most important stories I think we wrote, and sometimes the most important stories aren't the ones that people pick up on, unfortunately, and that happens in journalism. And the thing that happens with media criticism is people say the news doesn't cover this, but when we spend a lot of resources, and it is expensive, and spend a lot of time, people don't share it. People don't talk about it, like the Kardashian story. So it's not just the media. But anyway, when Mayor Bala was elected, there were all these stories that came out that said that he was canceling Christmas because he was a Sikh Indian, and all these crazy things. And there were threats made because people, for some reason, they buy into this stuff. They think it makes them smart to find something on the internet and not check it. And they say, I don't know who to trust. That's silly. It's a cop-out. 5 years ago, you knew how to look things up, what happened to everyone. So all these stories were going around with all these nonsense things about him. And I said, this is a real problem that people just believe this stuff. Let's figure out who wrote these stories and why. And it was kind of out of our scope, but we would take the time a few times a year to make time to try to do an investigative story. And we did some that did make change, even if most of the time we had to keep up with what people needed to know, their taxes going up, parking things, whatever. So it's the reason the media doesn't do more stories like this is sometimes we just don't have the resources. But I said, we're going to do this. We're going to try to find out where these fake stories came from and remind people that they have to have a little bit of doubt in their mind. Don't doubt everything equally, but if something seems too good to be true, look around and see if it's coming from someone who's got some background. See if it's from a source that's been around and can be sued if they make mistakes, not some website saying federalism, freedom, because that's what a lot of these websites are that are kind of fake. They make you think they're about American freedom and they're really against the American press, and they don't want people to think for themselves. So I went to some techie friends and I said, if we wanted to find out who owned web pages where these stories were on, how would we do that? Is it even possible? And some people gave me some advice, and I sat down with some of the reporters and I talked to Dave and Lucia and said, can we spend some time doing this, even though it means we might not do as many stories as usual for the next few weeks? And they understood the importance of it. We eventually figured out who probably was the guy who was writing these stories. We called him and we all sat in a room because we don't like to make tough phone calls. And I left him and I got the guy's voicemail and I said, we're a local paper. And, I explained what the story was. And he called back and he said, I like local media. I think they're doing a better job sometimes than national media. And he gave us a long interview, but he said, I didn't write the stories myself. I have a satire site and the stories appeared on my satire site and I did not write them. But so anyway, so we wrote this story about where this fake stuff came from, but really it was a story about how willingly people believed it. We talked to somebody in Hoboken politics who was publishing a lot of stuff that was purely fake because he agreed with it in his mind. And we talked to him and he said, well, I think a lot of people aren't journalists, so they don't really know how to determine if something's fake. But once you share something, where are we now? We're in a situation where people a year ago wanted to say COVID was fake. Someone told them it was exaggerated or a hoax, or the media was trying to scare people. Then they had to say doctors were trying to scare people for what? Because people don't want to admit they made a mistake or they fell for a lie. And when a very powerful person can tweet to 80 million people, as somebody did in the last few years, this is being exaggerated. It's no different from flu. That has an impact, and it has a dangerous and deadly impact because people don't take precautions. So this was a story we wrote. Maybe it didn't reach a lot of people, but I actually, once I had reporters working on different aspects of it. I had Marilyn, who's now works for the city of Hoboken as a public information officer. She wrote about what's a 5-step way to know if something's fake news, and another reporter did. We had the graphic staff, the brilliant artists, put something together. And then I drank coffee all night and took all the reporting these various people did and the sources they talked to. They got a professor to talk about propaganda. And I drank coffee all night one night and synthesized it into a story that was probably still too long for people to read, but ultimately it was something we got a lot of feedback about, and Columbia Journalism School wrote something nice on their webpage, and they said, it was a good job for a weekly paper.
Can people find this article on the interweb?
Yeah, you can, and it's a real article you can find. You can use Google or any search engine you want, and I think people have to remember that we're forgetting our history very rapidly, because the way when people delegitimize all media, when they send out fake news and they tell you the real news is fake news, it's because they're trying to delegitimize any possible source that can counteract a politician's spin. So when somebody starts off by saying all the media is the enemy, then you lose people that could possibly counteract the lies a politician is telling. And then they start saying, well, the doctors are exaggerating. Well, these are people that ask questions all day and challenge things, and suddenly they're delegitimized. And then now we have people who put the word expert in quotes because somebody who deals with research 8 hours a day is dangerous to a political narrative. And suddenly we're saying the word expert in quotes, which is its own kind of sheepism. That's sheepism. That's being a sheep.
And there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Let's
the people who call everyone else sheep are
We just have a couple of more slides. You'd mentioned this before that now you not that long ago, but you parted ways from the Hudson Reporter.
Yes, we had new owners, and they didn't want to spend money on experience. And
you went from a situation where you had Nancy Colasurdo says, "Preach."
Yeah.
You were saying before that there was a newsroom and a marketing team that came in, graphics and different reporters in each town. And then after you left, there was just one person working on the paper, and then
2 reporters.
and then
left,
and then now I think that there's just like a squirrel typing up this. I think because the one person you mentioned.
There are 2 reporters still. Somebody new was hired. But there's no newspaper office anymore. Everyone works out of their homes, and media is evolving. But I think people don't really understand how badly they need reporting until it's too late, until a building goes up in their backyard and nobody wrote about it. I'm at Patch now, and I get people emailing me and saying nobody else has been able to help me. And there are some desperate situations, and those are the stories that matter. They don't win awards, they don't get ratings, but that's why we're there. And I think people would be really sad if they lost media.
So that people can they can read you on Hoboken Patch.
Yep.
I
have
and
my
as
name
Melissa,
is
Melissa Abernathy mentioned your Instagram. Where can we find your Instagram?
Put my name into Instagram, and
and you can see an image like this that you took in the.
That's just one of the. I take a lot of. I'm not a photographer. A lot of my photos you'll never see, but that was one I liked. I love the Pine Barrens in fall. It's a different world. You can drive 90 minutes south of Hoboken and be surrounded by flat farmland on 4 sides. And the cranberry harvest is coming, and I recommend that anyone who needs a nice socially distanced drive should go down, drive around the cranberry bogs of the Pine Barrens.
I see this one as a sequel to Ansel Adams' Christina's World, where Christina's like, you know what? I'm dusting myself off and heading home. And then
cranberry picking.
The final image, which we've been looking at the whole time as a background, is a lovely, lovely image of Upper Washington Street.
Yes. Yep. That's just one of my favorites because it's Hoboken in the snow, and pretty soon we'll all be complaining about snowstorms, but in the middle, when it's still 80 degrees, it is nice to look back at Hoboken in the snow.
Caren Lissner, we thank you for joining us on Hoboken Talks. You do get your
I get a mug.
Your mug.
Thank you.
But also, personal front, I thank you for being dedicated to getting the truth out there all the years with the Hoboken Reporter. Now with Patch and Jersey Digs, it's important.
And I've had some stuff in the Washington Post, not just funny stuff. You can find my stories there too if you want. I'm still writing them. But yes, it's true.
So we thank you. And
thank you, Jack.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having such an interesting show.
Now, coming up next week, I will return as the host. Again, where we will have the new director of the Hoboken Public Library,
Yay.
Jenny Pooh. Have you met her yet? If you haven't, tune in. After that, how about Pastor Elaine Ellis Thomas? Now, I'm not doing that one. They told me I couldn't.
Oh.
No.
Aw.
We always, these shows are in memory of Donald Shackett, who was a great friend of the museum, and actually in his will mentioned the historical museum. So that is greatly just appreciated, and we give our love to his family and friends. The New Jersey Historical Commission, we received a technology grant from the commission, and just since the last time that I hosted Hoboken Talks, there's some new lighting. The microphones are new, and we really helped turn this into a more professional looking and sounding presentation. Always thank the Applied Development Company who provided the museum with this physical space at a rent of $1 a year. So hugely appreciated. And if you have not been to the museum recently, there's a new exhibit. The main exhibit on the lower level is The Avenue, A History of Washington Street. It's wonderful. I was at the opening, and I need to come back and actually spend a couple hours here, because just wonderful images and items and text, and it's exactly what it says: a history of Washington Street. So whether you're new in town or have been here for decades, you'll learn something in that exhibit. And here upstairs, there is a show called, and that's where we film Hoboken Talks, on the upper level. Cavemen Built My Skateboard. What does that mean? I don't know, but it's work by a wonderful young photographer named Joan Michelle, and you can see her photography up here, and that just opened, so you can come here and see that. This Sunday at 4 p.m. right here at the museum, 13th and Hudson, Street Corner Talking. Wonderful event planned. You know him from Hoboken Talks, Danny Schott, but also someone named Buttered Roll will be here. How about Cindy Dawson? She gave me a ride home from the city a couple of months ago. I appreciate it. Roxanne Hoffman hasn't given me a ride, but I don't know. Joel Lewis, Nancy Bevilacqua, they'll all be here. And, support the museum. Go to the website, donate, visit. You're a part of the Hoboken history, so join us. All right. Thanks. We'll see you next week. Take care.